First Person is produced in cooperation with the Far East Broadcasting Company, who rejoice in the stories of changed lives through the power of Jesus Christ. Learn more at FEBC.org.
Part of the strength is that we are in Chicago, and I think it's the commitment to the mission and practical training. I think every president kind of knows that we are committed to practical training, and this is a great setting to do so.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of First Person. I'm Wayne Shepherd, and this week's guest is the president of the Moody Bible Institute, Mark Jobe. We'll begin the conversation momentarily. I appreciate you tuning our way. Each week we try to bring you another story of how God uses people who are wholly committed to Him for His glory. Over the years, we've met people from all walks of life, and every one of them has given testimony to how faithful God has been to direct them in the way they should go. If you'd like to explore any of our past interviews, they are all available online at firstpersoninterview.com. You can download them from our website, or you can subscribe to our podcast using any number of podcast apps. We're also found on Facebook at facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. Well, Mark Jobe is both pastor of a large church with several locations throughout the Chicago area and president of Moody Bible Institute. And since he's had this unique job description for a while, it's time to catch up with him. Well, Mark, even though we see each other occasionally for recording sessions of Bold Steps, which is on many radio stations, I thought it'd be good to reintroduce you to our first-person listeners here. It's been a few years since you've been on this program.
It has been a few years, and Wayne and I see each other on a regular basis. He's one of the hosts of Bold Steps, and so we're in the studio quite a bit together, aren't we?
We are, and I really appreciate the friendship that has developed as a result of a radio ministry together, Mark. But I want to talk about you in this dual role of president of Moody Bible Institute and a full-time pastor of not just a church, but a whole group of churches in the Chicago area. So we'll talk about both those things, if that's okay. First of all, your role as Moody president, what do you know now about this job that you didn't know a few years ago?
Well, Wayne, I do have to say I've stepped into multiple roles: president, Moody Bible Institute, pastor of a network of churches. My favorite role, by the way, is grandpa.
Oh, there you go. I should have acknowledged that.
That kind of supersedes all those other roles, but those are important roles as well.
You and I have talked about that, haven't we?
So, I stepped into the presidency of Moody in January of 2019. I've always appreciated Moody. I studied here. My son went here. My wife went here. My sister went here. So I've had a love for this place and very impacted by it as well. But obviously, I was never in a leadership capacity. So I had a steep learning curve about education, about radio and media, and also about publishing.
Yeah.
And so
Moody is all those things.
It is all those things. And what I've loved about my learning experience is that there's some amazing people in this place. The heart of the people, the character of the people is just incredible. And so I feel very privileged to lead a team that is so committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Higher education, boy, that I knew when I was coming in that higher education was in the midst of a revolution, so to speak, and challenges across the country. And I had heard about the 25 cliff. What I didn't know is that COVID would be hitting right in the middle of this.
Factor.
So there was a lot of transition change. Of course, we're in the heart of Chicago, so a big city with a lot of restraints. So we've had to navigate some stuff that I didn't feel I was quite prepared for. But by God's grace, the Lord has been good to us.
He doesn't call us, but that He equips us, right?
He really does.
Right. Can I take you back? 25 cliff. I'm not familiar with that phrase. What is that?
So, in 2008, there was the economic recession, and people stopped having kids for a season. And so the amount of 18 and 19-year-olds in 2025 steeply declined because of the birth rate.
Okay.
And so that, of course, affects a lot of colleges and high schools as well, but colleges as well. And so a lot of institutions have been bracing for that. Now, I want to say that the good news for Moody is that we've actually this year, 2025, seen an uptick in enrollment, which is really
it's encouraging,
baffling in a way, but super encouraging as well.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the church ministry that you have as well in a few moments. But just to stay on Moody for a moment, the uniqueness about Moody is that it's in the heart, in the city, the downtown of Chicago, which is pretty unusual, isn't it? It has been for, 100 and how many years now?
In 2026, it'll be 140 years.
How about that?
And we are recording this in downtown Chicago right now, in the heart of Chicago, surrounded by skyscrapers. But, the vision of D.L. Moody, the evangelist, was for cities. He had a passion for cities. He was not from a big city. He was from a little rural area. But if you read some of his writings, he talks about the importance of reaching cities. In fact, in one of his quotes, he talks about cities being sort of like at the top of the mountain, and the rivers that flow out of the cities affect the entire nation.
It's a good picture.
It is. And so when I came to study at Moody Bible Institute, I couldn't stand the city. I wanted out of this place because I had been raised in a small town of 200 people, more sheep and cows than people. And there was, I don't think, any building in the whole town that was over 3 stories. And so I landed in the heart of the city of Chicago, always noise, sirens, police, people. And I couldn't wait to graduate, to get out of the city. But a pastor challenged me when I was a student. He knew that I had a heart for church planting. And he said, Mark, before you go anywhere else, remember that the nations have come to the cities. And if you reach the cities, you can reach the nations. Think about that. And maybe God wants you to plant a church here first. I wanted to say, get thee behind me, Satan. But, I couldn't quite shake that word and that thought. And so I thought it was a temporary assignment. And 38 years later, I am still pastoring the church that I started to pastor so many years ago.
I should have mentioned that when you were with us previously, we told the backstory of your life, your testimony. And that program is in the archive that I'll list in our program notes so people can catch up with the early part of your life and how God moved you from Spain to Chicago. But that's in that earlier program. But the students who study at Moody, the city gives them and this was always the case for remaining in downtown Chicago, it gives them a lab for evangelism, doesn't it?
It really does. People have asked us over the years, why do you stay in Chicago? And we have had people offer us land in much more rural settings. And even recently, not that long ago, someone offered us a campus pretty far away, but in a very remote setting. And I tell people we're in the heart of Chicago, not because we're stuck here, but out of conviction that one of the greatest places to train our students, not just theologically, but practically, is in the heart of a big city. Because as soon as students walk out of the door of this campus, there is pretty much every kind of people group, language, ministry that you can imagine, from university students. We have multiple universities here, to Chinatown, where people speak Mandarin and Cantonese, to the Asian Center up on the north side, where many people from Asia have come, to suburban families, to you name it, it's here in the city of Chicago. And we feel like it's a great place to train our students. In fact, all our students are required to do what we call PCM, Practical Christian Ministry. So they cannot graduate if they aren't involved in some form of ministry in the city of Chicago.
How do you account for the fact that commitment to staying in the heart of the city has spanned how many presidencies now through the years, 140 years of Moody Bible Institute, and yet that commitment hasn't wavered, has it?
It has not.
How do you account for that?
I'm the 10th president, and so I think every president has had to struggle with, do we stay, do we leave? There's people saying, get out of the city. In fact, I have parents sometimes that say, we love Moody Bible Institute. We just wish it weren't in Chicago. And I always have to explain part of the strength is that we are in Chicago. And I think it's the commitment to the mission and practical training that has, I think every president kind of knows that we are committed to practical training, and this is a great setting to do so.
And coming up on First Person, we'll talk with Mark Jobe about a story that comes from his experience as a pastor. Stay with us. Here's Ed Cannon on the Vision for FEBC's weekly podcast.
The primary purpose of Until All Have Heard, of course, is to share the experience that FEBC has because we have staff on the ground in so many oppressive places. But in addition to that, we're trying to speak to you in a way that only the kind of testimonies you'll hear from around the globe can do.
Discover how the gospel is making a difference around the world. Search for Until All Have Heard on your favorite podcast platform, or hear it online at febc.org. My guest is Dr. Mark Jobe, who is not only president of Moody Bible Institute, but also senior pastor of New Life Community Church in Chicago. And I want to talk about that, Mark, because it's a unique job that you have. When you were interviewed for this job at Moody, did you insist? Did you feel God calling you to the church and remaining at the church? How did that work out?
Well, when Moody first called me up, I told my wife, hey, they called me up to see if I'd be interested in being president of Moody. And I laughed. And she said, well, why are you laughing? I said, I love Moody, but I don't want to leave the church. We are seeing many people come to Christ. Exciting things happen. And she said, but it's Moody Bible Institute training young people to go all over the world, and it's the heart of Chicago. We should pray about it. So I listened to the Holy Spirit and I listened to my wife.
Yeah, very often the voice of your wife sounds like God. I know the drill, yeah.
And we both prayed about it together. We fasted, and here's what I felt. I felt like God gave me the assurance that He would give me clarity in the process. And it took 4 months, but by the time the process was over, there had been a unanimous vote, confirmation. And so I said, I think God has been very clear, and so I'm going to say yes. But I said to the chairman of the board, I will say yes if I can continue to be engaged in pastoral ministry. If I can't, then my answer is no, because I don't feel like this chapter's over. And I'm not employed by the church. I'm fully employed by Moody Bible Institute. I don't have an office there, but I still want to be engaged in hands-on ministry.
So we're several years into it. How's it working? How's your energy level? And can I ask, how do you divide your time, and how do you work out the priorities?
Yeah. Well, I'm full-time at Moody Bible Institute, and we have several pastors on our team that are co-vocational. They work full-time jobs, but they minister also at the church. And so we have a team that stepped up, including my son, who's 31 years old, a graduate from Moody Bible Institute. I have a blast, by the way, because at our main location, he preaches one week, I preach the next week. It's been fun to coach him and raise the next generation of leaders. So really, I function more as a spiritual coach to our pastoral team. That little group of 18, 19 people that we started with has grown into, we have 27 locations, 44 worship services on Sunday.
Within the Chicago area?
Within the Chicagoland area. We have 10 others overseas.
Do you?
But in Chicagoland area, 27. We do services primarily in English out of those 44 services, but also in Spanish, in Quechua, which is a Guatemalan dialect, and in Mandarin. And there's about, last Sunday, there were 6,300 people in person that met, plus a couple thousand more that watch online. So it impacts quite a few people.
You talk about a mission field. It's right here, isn't it?
It is a mission field. And Wayne, what encourages me the most, especially post-COVID, the openness among especially young people under the age of 35 that we've seen. In the last 2 years, 24 months, at our church here in Chicago, we have seen over 1,000 people make a decision to follow Christ, get spiritually mentored and baptized in the last 24 months. We have never seen that many people in a concentrated period of time come to Christ.
How do you account for it?
I believe that there is a spiritual openness because we haven't really changed anything that we're doing, but the response has just doubled, tripled, quadrupled in how open people are. I think COVID left a generation very isolated. I think it exasperated anxiety, depression, addiction, and even suicidal ideation. And I think in that emptiness and difficulty, more young people that were not very religious before are looking to the heavens and looking to spirituality for answers that maybe before they were too busy partying, having a good time. And I think I attribute it to the move of God, and God will use different situations to prepare a harvest. But we're living in a time of harvest, not just in Chicago, but I think this is across different pockets around the nation and the nations right now. And that's why I feel an urgency in my spirit to say, hey, we can't miss this harvest time.
Yeah. Well, the people that you serve through the church, the communities that you serve, they many times come from non-evangelical backgrounds, right?
The majority.
Catholic and otherwise, the majority. Yeah. And many of them struggle with morality issues, drug use, that kind of thing. I know you have former inmates who come to the church. Talk about the makeup of this body of believers now that is so amazing.
It's a little bit of everything. And of course, we're in 27 different neighborhoods. So we're in gentrified neighborhoods where people have moved in from Michigan and Wisconsin to go to university and now are working high-end jobs. And we're in some suburban neighborhoods that would look very much, 2.3 kids. And we're in some urban neighborhoods, some that are primarily Hispanic, some African-American. And so it's a very eclectic group of people, very multiracial, representing people from all walks of life, from people that are coming straight out of prison to CEOs. It's a very interesting group of people. But most of them in Chicago do not come from an evangelical or Protestant background. The majority of the people that we're reaching come from usually a lot of them have Catholicism in their roots, but typically don't go anywhere to church. So they have I would say a lot of them have a Catholic birth and they were baptized, but the majority I talk to don't go anywhere to church, very non-churched. And of course, when you're non-churched, you live like the world. And so many of the people that we come are living together. They're living the values and the culture of the world. And so part of the gift that God has given us as a church, I think, is to speak boldly but lovingly as we call people into a walk with God.
You don't hold back in any way. It's the full gospel you're preaching.
Yeah. So, for example, last week, we had some baptisms, and I gave a call to salvation. And I always, on Baptism Sunday, which is the first Sunday of the month, I call people to Christ to say, you need to give your life to Christ. And Wayne, this is not a soft call. This is typically what I'll do. I'll say, you may be in settings where people say everybody close their eyes and bow their heads. Here, I'm going to ask that everybody open your eyes, all eyes open, looking around, because I'm calling you to a bold step to follow Jesus. And if you cannot clearly and boldly give your life to Christ, then it's probably not going to take outside. And so I call people clearly to come forward, get on their knees, and I clearly talk about the cost of surrendering their life, of repentance and belief. And 40 people came forward, tears streaming down faces, weeping, giving their lives to Jesus Christ. many of them first time they'd ever been in a Christian church. And so that kind of openness is just thrilling. To me, I have a heart of an evangelist, so I love seeing people that have very little background giving their lives to Jesus.
You don't pull any punches when you preach, Mark, to these folks. And I want you to tell the story of an altar call, a unique altar call that you gave in a unique setting of a church. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, so last year, one of our congregations that has both Spanish and English, they have 4 services, and they said, we want to do a joint service at the end of a season of fasting and prayer, but we don't fit in our church, and so we need to rent a venue that seats us. So the closest venue that was big enough was basically a nightclub, and like full-out nightclub.
Let's be honest, huh?
And so I went and preached, and the pastor said, could you preach in Spanish and I'll translate in English? And there was probably 500 people or so in this nightclub gathering together. And I preached on the woman bent over and how sometimes we get used to being distorted in some way or another until we encounter Jesus and he straightens us up. And I'd never done this before, but I felt like real strongly compelled to challenge people that are living together or sleeping with their boyfriend and girlfriend on the weekend. So I challenge you, if you've given your life to Christ or if you're giving your life to Christ, I'm going to challenge you, and you are living with your boyfriend or girlfriend and you're ready to change, to come forward as a couple and repent and be ready to take the next step, which is marriage or move out. I thought, I'm not sure if anybody's going to show up. 15 to 16 couples came forward, and they got on their knees at that place, and they surrendered, many of them with tears. One lady, as I was talking, I said, some of you have been living together for a long time. One lady was shaking her head, and I said, so how long have you been living with your boyfriend? She said, 17 years. And so I said, well, I talked to the pastor real quickly, and he said, we'll start premarital counseling next week. So they prayed. Many of them gave their lives to Christ. They made a decision. Well, 3 months later, I get a call from the pastor, and he says, hey, we're marrying 6 of those couples are getting married all at the same time. And he said, several of them asked, hey, is the nightclub pastor going to come and speak? So I guess I was called the nightclub pastor. And so I had the privilege to show up there and help lead as 6 couples turned to each other and said, I do. It was a powerful, beautiful picture of what the gospel does, because the gospel truly does change everything.
It does. You can tell that Mark Jobe loves his dual role of pastor and Moody Bible Institute president. God is using him in powerful ways in both of those callings. If you joined us in the middle of today's interview, you can go online to hear the entire conversation at firstpersoninterview.com. You can also share that link with others you think might enjoy hearing what you've heard. Again, it's firstpersoninterview.com, or subscribe to our podcast, First Person Interview with Wayne Shepherd. A big thank you to the Far East Broadcasting Company for supporting these weekly interviews. FEBC has an extensive network of radio stations, programs, and social media programs that reach millions of people every day with the gospel. To learn more, visit febc.org. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Thank you for listening to First Person.